It's almost like I'm studying all of these things that I didn't do, growing up, right? Not being taught about color, not ever thinking about color theory because I didn't identify as an artist.
Hello, print friends, and welcome to the 83rd episode of Pine Copper Lime, the internet's #1 printmaking podcast. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. I release weekly podcasts with people in the print world who are doing something a bit beyond the expected. So please subscribe on your podcast listening app of choice. You can also find Pine Copper Lime on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and you can find all this and more at pinecopperlime.com. We also have a Patreon where generous, lovely, and extremely good-looking print fans sign up at tiers that start at just $1 a month. And recently, we've added a new feature to our Pine Copper Lime community, Shop Talk, with Timothy Pauschak, our editor. These are brief, short, all-business, quick and dirty tips and tricks of the trade from our guests. We'll answer questions like, where do you get your inspiration? What's the best way to solve mistakes? What's the best way to learn from them? What's the best thing to text your crush? This is technical printmaking nerd content at its finest. Check it out through the link in the show notes. And if you want to show your love of printmaking to the world, we do have Pine Copper Lime merch with all kinds of fun designs to show your PCL love and make print jokes to confuse and intrigue your friends and family. Check out the link in the show notes and send us a picture of you out in the world with some of your PCL swag. We'd really love it. Printmaking forever, shun the non-believers. This episode of Pine Copper Lime is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, who've been offering a diverse range of high-quality products to your creative practice since 1997. If you've been following them along on Instagram, and we really recommend that you do, you've no doubt seen their newest initiative in the print world, Speedball's Print Posse. Working with artists like Andy McDougall and Little Tuffy, they have created a brand new line of custom inks and additives to push your practice even further. So head on over to the Speedball's Print Posse shop at speedballart.com, where you can find out where you can pick up a can of your new favorite color. Link in the show notes, as always. Oh, print friends, oh my dear, dear print friends. There are some big changes happening at Pine Copper Lime these days. Our friend and co-host Ronaldo Gil-Zambrano has been hard at work interviewing the best and brightest printmakers in the Spanish-speaking world. He has in fact created so many episodes that we have started a second feed on Pine Copper Lime just for them. So, if you're a Spanish-speaking print friend, you know a Spanish-speaking print friend, or you are an aspiring Spanish-speaking print friend, check out the link in the show notes and make sure to subscribe there. And don't worry, we're still going to be bringing you our bi-monthly bilingual episodes right here, but if you're looking for print content el español, check out that link. And if you head over right now, we actually have a brand new Spanish episode lined up for you, as well as the complete catalog of back interviews with our Spanish-speaking print friends. I'm so excited. My guest this week is Alexis Nutini, a Philadelphia-based relief printmaker. We'll talk about his early experiences growing up in a family of cultural anthropologists, the switch from large-scale black and white figurative woodcuts to much more intense multicolor abstract work, using technology to experiment with printmaking, and his expansive collaborative practice at a time when most of us are separated. This is also an episode we did in collaboration with Ronaldo Gil-Zambrano to do a double release in English and Spanish. So if you're a Spanish-speaking print friend, please do not hesitate to check out the other link in the feed this week, which is our guest conversation with Ronaldo in Spanish. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to find some inspiration in that old junk drawer with Alexis Nutini. Hi, Alexis. How's it going?
Good. How are you? Happy to be here.
I'm doing really well. Thank you for joining me and for being willing to do a back-to-back double interview and being one of our bi-monthly bilingual Pine Copper Lime guests. I became familiar with your work truly just through Instagram. I don't even know if Instagram suggested you to me or if someone sent you to me, but the work that you're doing is just stunning and eye-catching and quite unusual. And I just instantly was like, what is this? I want to know more about it. And so that was maybe a year ago or more that I first saw it. So I'm really excited to have a chance to get my questions answered. But before we dive into talking about the work itself, would you please introduce yourself and tell our dear listeners who you are, where you are, and what you do?
All right. Well, I'm Alexis Nutini, and I am I guess I would say I'm a relief specialist, primarily in woodcut, and I do reductive printing, hand carving, and I use a CNC, computer numerical control machine, to make my plates. And my print shop is in South Philadelphia.
Excellent. But you're not from Philly, so tell us where you grew up and what role did art play in that part of your life?
All right. Well, I've had a very sort of international upbringing. I was born in Mexico City to scholarly parents. They were anthropologists. And I was born there and spent a little bit of time there, but I really grew up on the Gulf Coast in the state of Veracruz in a little town where my grandmother had made her home. And since they were anthropologists, I definitely was able to visit a lot of different places, cultural centers, big cities, Mexico City, Puebla, as well as little towns, little villages, very rural, which is where they did a lot of their field research. So I was exposed to a big range of things. And there was art around our home, or, arts, crafts, the same thing to me. But a big influence on me was one of my father's informants, who was a muralist. And he was a sort of later day muralist, sort of one of the last muralists from the region that he did his research, which is Tlaxcala, which is in the central plateau of Mexico.
So I don't know very much at all about anthropology. I'm just curious about the use of the word informant there, because it sounds so much like a crime drama or something. Is this... What does that actually mean in that context?
So, I mean, that's a good question. So an informant, he's a cultural anthropologist, right? Physical anthropologist would study cranial structure and fossils, that kind of, like the physical human body and remains, right? Whereas a cultural anthropologist studies human behavior. So an informant, I mean, maybe there's another word. It's somebody that he interviewed from the local community that he studied. And in doing so, he got to be, you form these relationships, and he formed this great relationship with this painter from this region. Gotcha. And that was, I think, that was like the biggest, the biggest influence as a young person, was visiting this artist studio while my father did his research and, playing around in that house. And so, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so the relationship with the painter was sort of through your father's work and, studying human behavior, but it sounds like you actually got to have a personal relationship with the painter as well, and him to influence maybe or broaden your perspective as a little kid about art and what it was, hey?
Yeah. I mean, I think I just saw it. It was colorful. It was didactic, like a lot of the Mexican muralists were. And so I think it was just around. It was like, here are these colorful imagery and images of the indigenous folk doing representations of indigenous folk doing their things in that region. And that was some of the stuff my father studied. But the stuff that I was taught about were pre-Hispanic stuff, right? We go to the archaeological museum to see these massive carvings, stone carvings, and they had art because they were friends with this artist, that's the main person they collected, but it wasn't like I had an art education through that. It really was more social anthropology and an awareness of the culture in that region.
Gotcha. So how did that kind of evolve into you being an artist yourself then?
I mean, that's a good question, a funny question, really, because because my when my father moved from Chile to the U.S. and kind of left his family there, and because he was fluent in Spanish, and once he got involved in anthropology, the closest thing was Mexico. It made sense, right? And so being the son of academics, I had to go to college, right? And I didn't really have a direction. I pretty much just lived for going back summers to Mexico. That was my father was like, you do great in school and you're going to Mexico to see all your friends that we sort of, took you away from in a way. Not really, because we went back every summer, but that was it. That's what I lived for. I just going back in the freedom and the small town and just the richness of the life there. And so when I went to school, I mean, I didn't even know there was an art major. I just doodled. I sort of pseudo graffiti stuff in a sketchbook just because I lived in Pittsburgh, where that was my University of Pittsburgh was my father's academic affiliation. And so I kind of like doodled, but I did not identify as an artist. That wasn't. And then someone in college, a friend in college, and making my way in this liberal arts school, so doing philosophy, anthropology classes, just the basic requirements of that. Someone was like, you have all this background. I see you have these art books. They're my parents, and all these anthropology books. Like, why don't you take an art class? And sure enough, there was this explosion, and I was like, oh, I can get my degree in this? Cool, that's what I'm doing. But still, I arrived at it as being kind of lost, right? Not lost, just, that's just kind of how I came about it. I definitely did not have a portfolio and have anything. I was just kind of, you can get an art major, cool. I'm into that.
That's so funny. It actually kind of reminds me of my own experience with school. And I come from two librarian parents. So, pretty academic, they've got master's degrees. They both worked at universities or colleges as librarians. And so it was just always, you're going to college. Like there was never really sort of other options discussed growing up. And it wasn't like a really, God damn it, you're going to college. It never had that kind of like intensity about it. It just was, that was the path that was presented to me. This is what one does with their life. Yeah. So you're in college. Someone is kind enough to let you know that you can actually major in art making. And then where does printmaking come into the story?
So one of the few things that I did do, that I, as a maker, was sort of just doodles in the notebook and sort of like pseudo graffiti. I was never really like out there. I appreciated it because I lived in cities and I liked exploring them. So I did have sort of some pseudo graffiti and doodles, and it was very, very graphic and Sharpies. So my teacher asked if I had ever made a woodcut, if I had ever made a relief print. And it was something that it was sort of, since it wasn't a full-on art school, you took like a materials and techniques class, right? It wasn't just straight up printmaking.
Right.
And one of the options for the project was make a monotype or make a Xerox transfer or make a woodcut. And then I looked and I was like, I've seen all this stuff. I've seen all the Posada skulls and all of that amazing, amazing stuff. I know this. I know this stuff. And I just jumped in and they lent me some gougers and some plywood and that's it. Just I couldn't get enough of the carving experience, just that therapeutic digging out and then just making that impression, that thing that I think draws a lot of people, the immediacy of that woodcut, right? The low tech element and the quick way of repeating it and painting it different colors. time. I mean, and of course we had presses, but I was like, I don't need this. I just made giant woodcuts because I was having fun with that. Came much later, and that was it. They just suggested, hey, try. It was kind of the same way. And taking an art class, all of a sudden, all this stuff that had been dormant just was, exploding, coming out, and I just got really excited about it. That was it.
That was it. I love what you're talking about with the way you say the therapeutics of carving. I just think that so many printmakers will hear that and really respond to it because it is meditative for a lot of people. I think it really is calming for a lot of people. And I've even had some relief printmakers say, oh, I'm not even in it for the drawing. I'm in it for the carving. That like the least favorite part is the design, and then actually getting to sit down and watch the image appear is actually like their favorite part of it. Yeah. And then, so, relief, it sounds like it's kind of where you started, but you actually use a lot of different techniques to create the images that you use. You mentioned something about CNC, which I don't even know what that is. But you also stencil, you use collage. Can you talk maybe a bit about your current practice and everything that goes into it to create these really deep, rich images that you have now?
So there's a lot there, right? I mean, for 10 years, I just made monochrome monumental prints. And then I got a press that allowed me to really, all those were hand printed, right? And then, so I finally found a way to save up some money and do a little fundraising thing. Here, give me some money, I'll make a print after I get the thing kind of deal. And I got a press, and that's what really allowed me to start doing that layering of color, right? That rich layering. And I'm a technician, but I just love to over ink the plates. I want that glossiness. I think it's, I love, and I think everybody that's been around printmaking a long time always talks about that moment when you pull up the piece of paper, right? And you're like, that was not what I was expecting. Or you get that exhilarating moment where I'm like, that's what I was expecting. It's even better. And so I started developing that. It was getting the press that really brought out all of this color, all of this stuff that I hadn't been doing before, because it was hard to do by hand, and the messiness I liked. Again, it's that low-tech woodcut thing where you can just grab something. You don't even have to have it carved, ink on it, run it through the press, squish it through again, so I bought that press, and that's when I started doing that, right? And it was just color, and I was just able to do all that, essentially research through making the prints, what I couldn't really do before, right? And so now I still do all that. I still like that one-of-a-kind impression. I still, I want to have a new experience. I want to try a new color combination. It's almost like I'm studying all of these things that I didn't do, growing up, right? Not being taught about color, not ever thinking about color theory because I didn't identify as an artist, and, all of that stuff that I didn't do. And now with the press, I was able to combine all of that, the painterliness of a monotype, the mixing different blocks, just having a whole, all these series. And so a few years ago, so I'm developing all that, right? That one-of-a-kind, rich, inky print. Sometimes they have up to 20 layers, and they can't be archival anymore. There's so much oil-based ink, and they're just, and I think, and that's okay. They're archival enough. And so a few years ago, I was working with a Latinx group that invited me to do a project, and we got this grant. And I wanted everybody to have this, printmaking experience with me, right? Of mixing 10 different plates and color. And I wanted to involve everybody in the group and involve people that weren't even near me, digitally. And so with the grant money, I bought a CNC router. So it's this machine that you program through a computer, you create an image, and then the machine carves the plate itself. So I gathered this group of artists from Mexico, West Coast, and a lot of the community in South Philly, and I had everybody give me drawings, photos, and I carved them out, and I made this system where everybody could collaborate on prints and make their own one-of-a-kind prints. And it served as a way of doing workshops, teaching people about printmaking. And the institution that supports this is a nonprofit that does a lot of outreach. It's called a Fleischer Art Memorial. They've been around Philly for over 100 years, giving access to folks that may not have that opportunity. So they do free art classes. So part of the grant was to do that. So in this pretty package, I collaborated with 20, 30 artists from all over. I did the project. I bought myself this other tool, and I taught a large group of people about relief print and monoprints and just the whole process. And essentially that just led to what I do now, and what I really see what the significance of my practices beyond the formal, beyond my ideas, is this collaborative element. And now it's just a tool to serve as a master printer, collaborate to make a living. And and I still hand carve, I still do reductions, I still do all of that, but now it's this tool. If I want to do a color theory print, I can just run those plates. I can be printing on my press. In the booth, there's the machine making I have a booth where the machine is doing its thing, and I can multitask. And yeah, I mean, right now I'm working through this machine. I'm working with artists remotely.
Oh,
so
really?
that's there's a lot there, right? I mean, we could talk about the color in my work, the multiple plate, but I think that communal shared aspect, that activism inherent to printmaking, is sort of real. I'm sort of finally coming to the content of my work, and I think it's working with teaching. And again, instead of spending 3 weeks carving a plate, I can have that idea ready in 2 days. And now I have a library of hundreds, soon to be thousands of plates that I can combine. And that's why you're seeing this explosion of all of these prints and techniques, is because I have a library of plates. They're all 3/4 inch. It's like sort of my type high version.
Mm-hmm.
And everything just works. I don't have to change this pressure on my press. And I just, I can pull out a print from 6 years ago, print on it with a plate I made yesterday.
So yeah, as you say, there's a ton in there, but I'd love to hear a bit more about the collaborative printmaking experience. And particularly, it sounds like you're finding in our time of social distancing that you're able to do long distance collaborations. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing thing, right? It's just a digital file that can be sent to me. So it could be a Sharpie drawing. I can interpret a Sharpie drawing. I can interpret a half-tone photo, or I can just interpret, a more minimal graphic, right? So really all I have to do is get that image from somebody all over the world and make it in my shop all in one, and then do a demo on a video call, right? And so and it's just starting to happen, right? It's like I haven't been that good about updating my website and really putting this out there as something to do, simply because I don't have the time. But I do collaborate and have a partnership with another awesome printmaking institution here in Philly. It's called Brandywine Workshop and Archives. And they've been producing prints and giving, and they're a diversity-driven institution that really is giving a platform to artists of color, really just and of diverse backgrounds, an opportunity to make a print. So they have this visiting artist program where they select 6 or 8 artists, and then they pair them up with me or some of the other master printers. I mean, I say that, in quotes. I don't like, I would never refer to myself as that. I say I like to serve as a master printer, because it sounds a little weird, it's just like, but they pair me up with these artists, and then we work out a deal. And a lot of this institution, Brandywine, gets grants from the NEA and from all over, and they pair me with local and at-large artists to produce an edition, and then the institution gets half of the prints. Mm-hmm. The artist gets the other half of the prints, and then I get a few for collaborating. And so, and on top of doing community outreach and stuff too. So I do a lot of, little workshops where either kids or anybody involved at the other nonprofits just submit an image and I carve it for them. I even do it for my students. They're a mile away at the school I teach at, but I'm making some relief plates for them to just get them going since, just because I can and I can teach them, what I think is going to be the future. I mean, they may not be artists, but they might learn to use these machines for a job or for their creative practice. So I don't know if that exactly answers the question, but that's how I'm collaborating. I'm printing editions with another institution and also doing my own workshops, not so much now, and then also inviting other artists on my own to work with me.
Yeah, no, for sure. That definitely answers it, because I really like the way it's kind of a diversity of approaching it as well. It's not just like you going one-on-one to artists. It's not just kind of waiting for commissions to come in, but by being, sounds like, really active and looking at the different ways of going about this. It sounds like you've managed to keep quite busy, even in the last year, which has been quite slow, I think, for some artists, or some artists who have collaboration at the heart of their making. Yeah.
Yeah, too busy because I can't have people in here printing the projects, right? I can rate it. It's just hard. I think I think businesses go through it. Not that, I have to operate on some level as a business, but it's just hard to grow out of it. I can only work on so many projects at once while I print them myself.
Totally.
There's a mix that I can do. And then once I open up and invest more, I might bring in and mentor other printers, and then they can print them while I develop the projects.
Definitely. So I'd like to circle back for a second and talk about your use of color, because it's definitely one of the really standout, head-turning elements of your work. And it was also really interesting to hear that you'd worked completely monochromatic for 10 years at least. Yeah. And then you get this press, and, you can see a bit of the archive of your work on your website. And when you talk about an explosion, I think that is a great way to describe it, because it's just these huge, there's works that are 9 feet long on your website from that archive of when you were doing these big monochromatic black and whites. And then it's just this like movement and layers and richness. How did that happen? It seems to be like you just flipped on a switch, but I'm sure there was more to it than that.
Yeah. It was. I had been this like, I'm making this 10-foot tall like woodcut, like big, like sort of like almost like showy, and it was about me. And just like, here, I can carve this huge thing, and it was just like that. And I did a lot of that stuff was sort of based on I sort of called it a sort of visual ethnography. Ethnography is like what my folks did, right? They wrote about a lot of things going on in central Mexico, and specifically where they did this research. So I did this like visual thing, right? I would go and make a carving of an ofrenda, a Day of the Dead altar for a place that I visited, or I did that kind of stuff, right? Sort of like recording, but it was just, I kind of got tired of it. I think it was just more about the carving and traveling than really putting something out there. And I got this press, and I think all that stuff we were talking about earlier, the museums, the villages, the cities, the muralists, this artist's studio was full of color. All those muralists, Mexican muralists, use that color really effectively, right? In a didactic way. So yeah. I think I was doing some of that. I was sort of making woodcut murals about a lot of different things myself, places I visited. And then I think I got the press, and it just happened. It was just something that it was there, I would think about all the painted houses of the places that I traveled, all the arts and crafts, all of that. I think the stuff was there, and it's hard to say. I just all of a sudden realized how much I could study color, right? Like just simple color theory stuff, just changing the values, stuff that I was too lazy to do in college. All of a sudden I have I have this press and I'm running it and I'm realizing, transparent base to get that third, fourth color when I'm printing. I don't know if I have a clear answer to that. I guess the easy one would be just sort of some of the stuff that I saw growing up had to be there, and the markets, that was always part of it. Every time we went to a town or a city, we always went to the craft market or to the mercado, which is the market where they sell food, and everything's just full of color.
Yeah.
I often think of some of the stuff I'm doing. I mean, when you go to some of these markets, you go and you see there's just like a Chile store, or like a little shop, and there's like 40 different types of chiles, and it's like a monochrome range of red, right? And you're getting like 100, like 30 or 40 values of this dark red chiles, and so that's the kind of stuff that now inspires me. And I think that had to have been there, but I don't have a clear thing. I just sort of fell in love with color and printing after having that press, and it just developed, and I think part of it is, I think there's nowhere else to go. If I've been doing all this like monochrome stuff and I'm about one of a kind prints, it's like there's only so much I could do with grayscale or black and white mark making, right? So then I think it was just that natural process of always wanting a new experience when I pull a print. Does that make sense? It was like it just, and I mean, I remember one of my professors, they were great, but they would do these painting setups where they would have, on the left, they would have like the cyan variations, in the middle, their magenta variations, and on the right, their yellow variations. And I used to laugh at that. And I feel like that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
So, like I have the... I would be like, well, why would you do this? And it's like, just interest, honing the skill, learning about it, experimenting. And of course, with me, combined with just mixing it with graphics, creating moire effect, creating just unexpected optical results. So it's growing. And then I can teach that, right? Like I can teach people about color that way too. People that, sort of, so, I mean, it's amazing when you do a printmaking demo with relief, because it's so low tech and immediate that you pull it and then you pull 3 colors and then you get 6, with a little transparent base. People love that. It's like, oh, you could put a little piece of VHS tape in there and also mix it up. Awesome. I mean, all the printmaking methods have that, but relief is just so immediate. Here, bring a block here.
Yeah. And I think that there's something about relief. It's always the one that I use when I'm trying to get people to understand printmaking from complete scratch. Like that, people who are like, wait, what is this? What do you do? That you, like, when you can tell from the way that they're responding that they truly have never experienced any kind of image making through a transfer process. Like I will often talk about woodblock, or even if that's too complicated, just like stamping, just ask them, like, when you were a kid, did you ever use a stamp to do something? And just try and get them to that basic idea. But I think that's one of the great things about relief, as you say, is it's so low tech, yet it's so versatile. It's so immediate, and it can be so detailed, or it can be graphic, or it can be black and white, or incredibly colorful. And it's really sloppy. Right? Totally. Like you can have prints that have that intentional chatter left in them, that are, or prints where the registration is intentionally loose to get kind of more of a painterly effect. It's really, really interesting, everything you can do just with the simplest of ideas with it. Yeah. You mentioned something just in passing there, which I actually did want to ask you about, was doing monoprints with VHS tape as stencils. And so it creates these, this really kind of like tangled sort of nest-like quality in the image. But how did you come to this? Like, and can you talk about maybe the technique for people who, I think once you see the image and once you read that it's with VHS tape, you can be like, oh wow, that is what that is. But Yeah. Can you
Well,
just talk about that series a bit?
I
Yeah.
guess I'll start just for the printerly, nerdy thing is, print is the great mimic of the art forms, right? And you can do the funny thing is I arrived at it through teaching. I didn't want, like, when I started teaching, doing academic and also workshops, I don't want people, I feel like I wanted to pass something along that I didn't do, maybe, or sort of move folks along. So I'd make them do monotypes and stencil prints with found objects. The first day, I show them my drawer full of stuff, and then say, you got to go to your junk drawer and your closet and bring in anything that you think might make a good transfer or might make a good stencil or a good offset. And in doing the assignment myself, right, I mean, teaching is like being a student, a perpetual student. And that's when I went and did my homework assignment, that's what I found in an old drawer. And then I did I teach this really a sort of free form method of doing stencils. Then you print the ghost from that, and then you flip the materials and then print the offset of those, the residual ink on there. But for the VHS, I did the VHS, and I was like, that's really cool. And like it's got this like erratic movement because you can't control it, and it's like spinning off the little reel, and falling. I'm like, oh, once it touches the ink, you can't really move it, so there's this rigidity of it. But really what it is was just me doing one of my assignments, and I just found something really good. And then after that, I started getting cassette tapes and audio tape to change the line weight. And yeah, so essentially what it is after I say make a carved wood block, I take a blank, sort of like what would be called a monotype plate, a blank matrix. I ink it, and then I just unroll the VHS tape, lay it down, and print on top of it. So the VHS tape blocks the other ink and mimics the VHS.
And I think what's interesting, you can see this in the quality of the prints, that VHS tape really does have that unusual quality of being really flexible, but also completely opaque. So yep. the way that it can completely block the ink, but also be twisted into an infinite number of designs is just genius, I think, and something that you would just never think of, but it has both those qualities.
Yeah, and you're right. It's like once you see that in the description, you can see that's like that fold, right? Or when it turns into a nest and it doesn't quite work and has a little curvature to it, or when it's like perfectly folded over like a piece of tape, right? It is tape. It looks like tape.
I'd also make sure that I want to get us a chance to talk about working non-figuratively, because printmaking, I think, is often associated with figurative art forms, narrative art forms. And it's not that like almost all of your monotypes that I've seen anyway, they're figurative, they have people in them. But as you've kind of transitioned into color theory, you've moved away from that a bit. And I guess, because so many printmakers do work figuratively, most of the artists I speak with are primarily figurative artists, but you're not. You're in the business of communication without immediately recognizable forms. And so maybe to kind of dive into this as an aspect of your art, what was, as you said, you were working in this more narrative style, and then again you've transitioned to the abstract world. Was that something that, took a lot of almost sort of reteaching of yourself to start to create images that you found to be successful, that were non-figurative? Did you take any of the techniques that you'd learned with you? What was that transition like for you as an artist?
I mean, I'm not 100% sure, because sometimes some of the stuff that you might be seeing, I might be collaborating with a sculptor. Like the big head that I've done recently, that's working with somebody else's image, but they've given me the permission to do the color, right? Other stuff I did, for 10, 12 years, I did record sort of, what I was seeing, right? This narrative. Part of it is like coming up with something from within, right? Like I always marvel at folks that can just do illustration out of nowhere. And I think it's just my way of just putting it out there, right? I think it's paring down what it is. It's like I have these cans of ink and I have a spectrum of color, and I think that's enough. I don't know if I have like a good answer to that. I think it was just what I've been about. And it also allows me to collaborate. It's been a big part of it. It's like if I bring in a bunch of blocks with imagery, I find that people don't engage as much with it. You know, they're like, well, I don't really like that figure. Or I don't really associate myself with that stuff. Whereas if I just bring circles and some grids, folks really just jump in. You know, at least that's been my experience. And I'm not saying that's what I do exclusively, but I think there's something to that. There's just something about just creating a value out of nowhere and thinking of basic geometric shapes or something round and just implementing it. And you know, it's challenging, right? It's like a lot of folks that maybe don't have experience making stuff. It's not always easy to make it sort of out of nothing, quote unquote, right? And so I think it's part of my research and my sort of investigation of color and just, you know, making this stuff. I don't know. I just didn't always think about it. It's just this happened, you know, and now I just associate it with this. It's the spectrum, not just of the color, but just the spectrum of what I'm doing. It's just, it can continue, you know, and I don't doubt that I'll come back to imagery and mixing it, you know. It's not as if I don't like it. It's just sort of what I'm doing now. As you know, for 12, 15 years, I did make images. And so I don't know if that was a concise answer, but I think it's sort of where I'm at, you know?
Yeah, no, I think I love it because it's a really honest answer, because I think that in art making, not every answer has a clean answer, you know, for lack of a better way of putting it. You know, it's sometimes we do just sort of stumble into things and we're not entirely sure why something works, but we know it does. And that's part of the process too. Absolutely.
No, think about it. It's sort of I wouldn't say I'm a late bloomer, but you know, the history of when I got into doing it sort of professionally or in school. And so it's just taken a while to figure it out and figure out who I am. I'm definitely honest about it. And I think there's a lot there. Sometimes folks are like, well, you're just doing this abstract and you don't have this content. It's like, I'm politically active. I'm upset about all the things going on. I work with a broad range of people. I have a very open experience of how I grew up and really multicultural. So it's like, I don't think I think that's a question now too, because there are a lot of movements. I mean, you bring it up. I've listened to all the podcasts with a big range of folks you interview. And it's like, this is valid, you know. It's like, sometimes I don't have to have that reason, you know. It's like, you know, I wouldn't say I'm an activist, but I would work with folks that are, and you know, I'm just doing this thing, you know. I guess it doesn't always have to be clear cut. I can do it in other ways and still geek out about the thing I love. You know, I can, you know, I can still help others and make a difference, even if it isn't, you know, I don't know, you know, pounding the streets or making these overtly political images, you know, like the folks I work with, that tells you where my politics are.
Well, and I think that one of the things that people can miss sometimes is that the aesthetic can be political. You know, just saying, I want to create an image that does something that's based more in the experience between the two people, the bonds that get formed, that I don't have to make an image that is sort of quote unquote doing something. That can be a political act in and of itself. That's like, you know, you can say my practice is based around connections between people and finding bonds, and not looking at art as something that is functional, that I want art to be something that can exist for its own sake. You know, all of those are absolutely real statements you can make just through what you're doing. And I think that art needs to be a big enough house where you can have people making imagery that in and of itself directly speaks to their politics, directly speaks to being a social critic and a political critic. And you also need work that is about enjoying human connection and building bonds between people, because that is where a lot of politics happens too, and a lot of social change. You know, as we say, printmaking has a huge, long history of political activism, and part of that is just bringing people together in one place, getting people talking, getting people learning how to compromise and communicate. All of that is part of it as well. Yeah.
Yep. It is. And I think you hit on something when you talk about the shared experience. A lot of the, even though it's not overt and sometimes there's graphics, a lot of a common theme and across from the stuff I'm doing is this landscape. There is a horizon, all those lines, there is a line. The color is something we share, right? I mean, but it's beautiful because we don't all see it the same way, right? But it's like we see, even if we don't see color, we see value changes, and we have that. That's a shared experience that I think we can tap into. And the same with the landscape, you know, it's like not being from anywhere. I mean, I guess I'm from Philly now, but having jumped around a lot growing up, I think about that. It's like, you know, I don't care about borders. I don't care about this sort of like construct, right? It's like I'm a little more fluid in that way. And I think that's a landscape is always a part of it, because it's like we share that horizon, we share that open space. And in abstraction, we share this similarity in how we read colors and how we read them culturally, but also just because we interpret them differently, but we all are seeing this thing and, you know, making up our own mind of what we're looking at.
Yeah, I also am curious about, with your practice, that you make unique prints with a medium that has the capacity for multiples. And I know you do editions as well, but a lot of your work is one of a kind. And I always appreciate when artists do that, because I think it pushes back a little bit against this idea that printmaking is only there. The only reason you'd make a print is because you wanted multiples, which when artists are doing one of a kind, they're saying, no, like this work can create an aesthetic in and of itself that has value, that has a way of making a mark on a page that you can't get any other way. And so I'm going to use it for that. But I'm wondering if you could just kind of speak to how making unique work became a part of your practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that depending on where you look at it, you touch on something, right? It's like some folks might be like, well, just see print as like the dog of the art world. Not anymore. But there is always that sort of, it's just reproduction, it's more commercial. Obviously, we are fully aware of the political value and all of that. But for me, I think ultimately the one of a kind is also problematic because sometimes it's also on paper and it's more ephemeral, right? And, you know, maybe if you care about that, like some collectors appreciate that, others don't. But for me, ultimately, I think it was just the experience of doing it, right? Like that VHS tape is going to move. There is no printing what I do with that perfectly, because that piece of paper sometimes is sitting with of that VHS tape. Sometimes the paper is a half inch, 3 inches floating before it gets squished through the press, right? So it's, I think, you know, I as I speak and talk about it, I think of it, it's also the challenge of it. For me, it's like, how can I make something good like this, but still, still work on what I've been doing, right? It's like I'm working, I've got this good composition going, I have these good colors going, let me throw something else in there. It is a challenge. It is, for me, it's the constant exploration, that constant up and down of like, oh, that print was not so good. Wow, I can't wait to try that again tomorrow, but with a different color, you know?
I like what you were saying there, because there's something about how if you really want to experiment in your practice, which it sounds like it's definitely a big part of what you do, is just getting in and getting ink on paper and throwing things on the press and finding out what works. If you're not worried about, can I edition this, you really take a lot of pressure off when it comes to experimentation. It opens up this whole whole world of things you can do if you're not thinking like, okay, but now can I do this 20 times?
And I can just come in and do one or two, and it isn't this limiting thing. Definitely. And I do editions, obviously. And I think the publisher I work with, Brandywine, I mean, it puts them in a bind because instead of documenting one print, they've just documented 40 variations of this other artist, right? So that's like money and time and archiving. And maybe their collectors don't want that because they're used to this one of a kind. But it's like, but see, you're getting this unique thing. You're getting this thing that was at that one special moment in the print shop with those two artists. Right. And that's the other thing. That's why I like collaborative work, because it feeds into the same stuff. Right. It feeds into the same thing that I'm losing a little bit of control, just the way I lose a little control with printing a VHS tape or some stencil or over inking something or, all the permutations of that.
Yeah. And to hear a printmaker talk about wanting to lose some of that control in the creative process is so interesting, because so much of what people look at printmaking and often will say, this is what we love about it, is they talk about the precision, they talk about the exactitude, like the registration, the details. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about it as almost reverse engineering that chance sort of back into what can be a very precise technical process.
Yeah, it is a thing, but I just embrace it. And believe me, I'm a technician, I like to think about it as being balanced, right? It's like, how am I going to grow if I'm just this one thing, right? I mean, I like to have a balance. No one would ever accuse me of not being good at being a printer, but it's great to hear you say that too, that it is sort of, in some ways it is contrary to that, right?
Yeah, and that can be part of the process as well, is finding that balance for yourself between knowing that you have the technical skills but choosing to release some of the control and the precision and let the print go where it needs to go.
And it's true. And the other funny thing is, like, the CNC is meant to be, it's like this mechanical thing. And I was like, and you get this digital image that's precise. And even the CNC, I don't run it perfectly. I allow it to make mistakes and things to chip away. And I've definitely met some of the folks that they pair me with. And sometimes I've definitely declined to work with artists that like point out the mistakes and are upset about certain things. I was like, I can't work with someone that like thinks about it so it's like, I want to embrace the mistakes, like the little misprint that's enhancing the print. I think you're onto something when the mistakes are enhancing your work, and that's a thing you didn't ask, but that's the whole thing about dos tres press. That just means dos tres is like a value judgment. It's a reminder to me that dos tres is just like, dos tres, sort of like, on a value scale. Like, how is that print? Dos tres, 2, 3, sort of like, it's a reminder to not take myself so seriously. It was this thing when I go back to Mexico and there's this, dude comes back from going to school and, and like, look at these prints and the artists, and they'd be like, dos tres, so. So that's sort of the origin of my press name. And so it's just a reminder of that. It's like, there's a lot of other things in life too. I am a serious printer, creative, but, I have a family and there's a lot of other things going on.
Oh, I love that. That's so funny. Yeah. I wanted to ask about that too. Cause I recognize the words as 2 and 3 is translated into English, but I had no idea that it's actually kind of a slang for like, Yeah.
So that's the saying is dos tres, no te dejes impresionar, which just means 2, 3. Don't let yourself get too amazed, too wowed by it. It's like relax. So it was always my friends kind of making fun of me, but it's good to be humbled and it's good,
Yeah, it reminds me of watching a documentary once about sign painters and hand painted signs. And they do incredible work and really understand the technique of sign painting and the right brushes and the right paints and how you get things. And they said that There is a phrase, though, in the sign painting community that's like IOAFS, which is, it's only a fucking sign. Like, so. Yeah. And I think that that's an important part of the creative process is you can get so pulled down into it and the technicalities and the academia of it and the discussion of it and the what are you going to do with your career of it. And it's so important to have perspective as well and to remember to don't have to take it all so seriously. Yeah.
Perspective. That's a good word to describe it. And so that's just a reminder to myself of that.
Absolutely. Well, I think that that's a beautiful place to wrap things up as we've reached our hour recording mark here. But can you let people know where they can find you, where they can maybe get in touch if they're interested in collaborating, where they can see your work, all of that?
So the usual places. Instagram is at dos_tres_press, and my website is alexisnutini.com. And I'm in the works of generating Dos Tres Press website where you'll be able to get information about making CNC plates, collaborating, and sort of more the shop collaborative aspect of my work.
Okay.
So thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, that was so fun to learn more about your work and to just talk to someone in Philly. I know my husband and I really love that city, and it's always nice to feel a little connected to it in hot, sticky Bangkok right now. Well, that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when my guest will be Jessica Robles. We'll talk about community college, being an introvert, the insignificant moments, and of course, dogs. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing help from Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. We'll see you next week. I have no idea why I said dogs that way.